You need to move to the back, the flight attendant said, her voice low but firm as her hand touched Aaliyah's uniformed arm. For a split second, the entire cabin went still, no one spoke, no one intervened, and every eye seemed to silently agree that she didn't belong. But as Aaliyah stood without a word and walked toward economy, what no one knew was that the message she had just sent would change everything before the plane ever touched the ground. She boarded quietly, no entourage, no fanfare, just the soft thud of polished boots and the calm presence of someone who'd spent more than 2 decades serving her country. Staff Sergeant Aaliyah Monroe, 42, wore her crisp Army uniform like a second skin, her shoulders squared with the kind of quiet authority that didn't ask for respect, it simply expected it. In one hand, she held a black duffel and a first-class boarding pass. It wasn't something she'd bought for herself. Her older brother, Marcus, now retired Colonel Marcus Monroe, had gifted it to her the moment she told him she was coming home. He didn't say much, just handed her the ticket and muttered, "Time you flew like you earned it." And she had. Every mile. Every scar. The plane was boarding for a domestic flight out of Dallas, headed to D.C., and the gate agents had barely looked at her as she scanned her pass. Her eyes were steady but tired, her movements precise. She wasn't here for the extra legroom or the champagne. She just wanted a window, some quiet, and the chance to breathe on her way home. She moved down the aisle of the first-class cabin, counting rows until she reached 2C. A window seat, just like she liked it. Aaliyah placed her duffel under the seat in front, folded her jacket neatly over her lap, and exhaled slowly as she settled in. Around her, business travelers chatted casually, tapping on tablets or ordering pre-takeoff drinks. A few gave her curious glances, some warm, some indifferent, but most looked away quickly. No one said a word. That was fine. She wasn't looking for attention. But the quiet didn't last. A woman approached, tall, polished, early to mid-30s, with a blonde bun pinned neatly above a slender neck and a laminated name tag clipped perfectly above her chest, Miss K. Shaw. She wore the smile of someone trained in corporate hospitality, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those narrowed almost imperceptibly the moment they landed on Aaliyah. Miss Shaw slowed her steps and took in the uniform, the seat number, then the face. There was a momentary pause before she spoke. "Excuse me," she said smoothly, her voice sweet like syrup and twice as thick. "May I see your boarding pass?" Aaliyah blinked once, mildly surprised but unbothered. "Sure," she replied, reaching into her inner breast pocket and pulling out the thick cardstock pass. She handed it over without hesitation. Miss Shaw took it, glanced quickly, then back up. "This is for seat 2C, she said, almost as if she were confirming it for herself. "That's what it says," Aaliyah replied calmly. Miss Shaw's lips pressed together in a smile that had started to fray. "And you're traveling alone?" Aaliyah's eyes held hers steadily. "Yes." There was a pause, short but heavy, and then Miss Shaw handed back the ticket with 2 fingers, like it was something slightly damp. "I think there may have been a mix-up," she said in a voice now lower, tighter. "This section is reserved for our premium guests." Aaliyah tilted her head slightly. "I'm holding a first-class ticket. I think I qualify." Miss Shaw's smile didn't return. "Sometimes, mistakes happen. Perhaps the agent at the counter assigned the wrong section." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the plane. "If you wouldn't mind, I can help you find a seat in economy." Aaliyah was quiet for a long beat. The air around her had shifted. She could feel the eyes now, passengers pretending not to look but listening all the same. "This ticket was a gift," she said, voice even. "From my brother. He booked it himself. There's no mistake." Miss Shaw took a step closer, lowering her voice but making her tone firmer. "Ma'am, we can resolve this without delay if you'll please relocate to the rear cabin. We need to close the doors shortly." And then, lightly, but deliberately, she reached out and touched Aaliyah's arm. Not a shove. Not violent. But enough. Enough to cross a line. Aaliyah blinked, slowly. The moment froze in her mind, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. No one said anything. No one objected. The nearby man in the business suit stared at his phone. A young woman with a designer handbag pretended to read the in-flight magazine. The silence said everything. She nodded once, very slightly, and began gathering her things. There was no argument, no protest. She adjusted her jacket, straightened her spine, and walked calmly toward the back of the plane. Seat 22F. Cramped. No legroom. No apology. She lowered herself into the seat as gracefully as she had in 2C, her face blank. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone. She typed quickly. She made me move. Said I didn't belong. Didn't argue. But she touched me. I'm okay. Just tired. Send. She turned the screen face down in her lap and stared ahead. Her heart beat heavy in her chest, not with rage, but with the weight of having to be gracious again. To be calm again. To endure again. Aaliyah didn't know what would come next. But she knew her brother. And Marcus Monroe didn't do silence. In the galley, Miss Shaw poured club soda into a glass with a satisfied flick of her wrist. She smiled warmly at a row of seated passengers and continued with her pre-flight checks. The mistake had been corrected. The seat reclaimed. The issue removed. But miles away, a phone buzzed in a sleek office lined with government files and aviation maps. And a man in that office stood slowly, his jaw clenched, as he read the message from his sister. Marcus didn't call the airline. He didn't file a complaint. He called the Federal Aviation Duty Officer directly. He didn't raise his voice. He just said, passenger name, Staff Sergeant Aaliyah Monroe. Seat 2C. Flight departing from Dallas. You're going to want to flag this one before it lands. Back on the plane, Aaliyah closed her eyes. She wasn't asleep. She was waiting. And in seat 2C, once hers, a memory of that brief moment lingered in the armrest where Miss Shaw had placed her hand. It lingered in the silence of passengers who looked away. It lingered in the quiet weight of humiliation that no longer surprised her, but never hurt less. But what no one yet knew was that the most dangerous thing you could do was push aside a soldier who had already survived things far worse than a tight seat and a cold shoulder. Especially when her brother was still watching the sky. And he had just entered the cockpit, metaphorically and literally, with both hands on the controls. The hum of the engines was steady, a low background drone that seemed to pulse beneath the tension now straining the air in row 22. Aaliyah Monroe hadn't moved since sending the message. Her phone rested silently on her lap, her gaze fixed on the back of the seat in front of her. She hadn't blinked in a while. Not because she was afraid, but because something inside her had gone completely still. Aaliyah had survived war zones with fewer emotions than the one she was battling now: disgust, disbelief, and that familiar ache of knowing she had once again been judged before anyone knew her story. Up in the cockpit, the captain of Flight 887 was reviewing pre-landing protocols when the secure line buzzed beside him. It was a rare sound, and one that immediately snapped his posture upright. He picked it up and answered with calm professionalism, Captain James Eldridge speaking. The voice on the other end was clear, clipped, and carried authority like a second skin. This is Colonel Marcus Monroe with the Department of Transportation. I'm calling regarding a passenger on your flight, Staff Sergeant Aaliyah Monroe. Captain Eldridge straightened in his seat. Yes, sir. Is there a situation? There is, Marcus said. Your flight crew downgraded a decorated U.S. Army sergeant from first class based solely on her appearance. No verification. No cause. She was asked to move by a flight attendant and physically directed to economy. The silence on the flight deck was sudden and absolute. I see, the captain said cautiously. I wasn't informed of. You'll be receiving a call from FAA compliance in the next few minutes. In the meantime, I suggest you speak with your crew. This isn't just about customer service. This is a civil rights violation at 35,000 feet, and if your team doesn't resolve it immediately and transparently, the landing won't be the only thing you'll have to explain. The line clicked off. The captain stared at the phone for a second longer, then turned slowly toward his first officer. "Get Miss Shaw. Now." In the first-class galley, Kendall Shaw was pouring a fresh glass of orange juice for a passenger in 3A when she saw the co-pilot approaching. He didn't smile. He didn't greet her. "Captain needs to see you." "Cockpit. Now." She froze, orange juice in one hand, the bottle trembling just slightly. She knew that tone. It wasn't a routine check-in. She wiped her hands, straightened her posture, and walked stiffly toward the front of the plane, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. Inside the cockpit, the door shut behind her. Captain Eldridge didn't mince words. "Did you remove a uniformed service member from her first-class seat?" Kendall blinked. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding." Did you check her boarding pass?" He cut in. "Yes," she answered too quickly, then added, "It said 2C, but she wasn't on my cabin manifest." You assumed, the captain echoed. "You assumed a black woman in uniform didn't belong in first class?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. "That passenger is Staff Sergeant Aaliyah Monroe. Her brother is Colonel Marcus Monroe. He's on the Federal Oversight Board for Aviation Standards. And he's already spoken to the FAA." The blood drained from Kendall's face. I was just trying to ensure." "No," the captain said, voice firm and low. "You were trying to enforce an image of who belongs in this section and who doesn't. You're going to apologize. Publicly. Immediately. And then you're going to escort her back to her seat." Kendall's chest rose and fell unevenly. "Yes, sir. One more thing," he added. "If this situation escalates into federal inquiry mid-air, and I have to divert or ground this aircraft early, I will make it clear that you were the one who caused it." He turned away and tapped the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently cruising at 36,000 feet and everything remains on schedule. We'll begin our descent shortly, but in the meantime, please remain seated while the crew performs final service checks. Thank you for flying with us." When Kendall stepped out of the cockpit, she didn't feel like a flight attendant anymore. She felt like a defendant. Her steps were slower now. The aisle suddenly seemed longer, and the weight of every watching eye pressed on her back. She reached the economy cabin and spotted Aaliyah sitting in 22F, still and unreadable, her phone on her lap, her boots tucked neatly beneath the seat. For a moment, Kendall just stood there, gathering whatever remained of her composure. Then she crouched slightly beside the row. "Staff Sergeant Monroe," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "there's been a clarification regarding your seat assignment. I'd like to escort you back to 2C. Aaliyah didn't look at her right away. She stared ahead. "Clarification?" Kendall swallowed. "Your name wasn't appearing properly on the roster. It's since been resolved." "I misinterpreted." Aaliyah turned her head, her eyes locked on her. "You told me I didn't belong. You touched me. You didn't verify anything. Now you want to act like it was just a mistake?" A few passengers nearby leaned closer, catching the change in tone. Kendall's cheeks flushed. "I apologize." "I should have. Say what you did," Aaliyah said softly. "Not what you're trying to cover. The truth. Say it." The air around them grew heavier. One row back, a teenage boy put down his headphones. An older woman clutched her handbag tighter. Kendall's voice wavered. "I judged you. I made an assumption based on your appearance. I was wrong." Aaliyah nodded once. Then she stood. With deliberate calm, she gathered her duffel and stepped into the aisle. She didn't thank Kendall. She didn't smile. She walked with the quiet strength of someone who had endured far worse, back toward the seat she never should have had to leave. When she reached 2C, she placed her bag beneath the seat again, folded her jacket across her lap again, and sat down, this time not as a mistake to be corrected, but as a reckoning. Kendall stood a few feet away, awkward and exposed. Aaliyah didn't acknowledge her. She didn't need to. The silence had said more than enough. The rest of the flight passed in strained quiet. No champagne. No laughter. First-class passengers barely made eye contact. One man pretended to sleep. Another avoided looking her way entirely. And when the seatbelt sign finally chimed overhead and the plane began its slow descent, Aaliyah's phone buzzed once. "Marcus, they're waiting at the gate. Don't move. Let them come to you." She responded with a single word, "Copy." As the wheels touched down and the cabin began its usual shuffle of stretching and unbuckling, there was none of the usual cheer. It was like the whole plane knew something had gone wrong but hadn't figured out how to respond. And when the cabin doors opened with a hiss and two men in suits stepped inside, badges at their belts, calm but firm, no one was surprised when they approached Kendall Shaw. "Ma'am," one said, "you'll need to come with us." Her mouth parted slightly. I apologized. "You can explain it in the report," the second agent said evenly. And with that, they escorted her off the plane. Not Aaliyah. Not quietly. Not forgotten. But Kendall Shaw, the woman who judged first and verified never, was now the one under review. As the doors sealed shut, Aaliyah remained seated, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes focused straight ahead. Her seat had been returned. But what came next would matter far more than where she sat. The cabin door sealed shut behind the two agents and the flight attendant they had escorted off. The air inside the plane, once thick with discomfort, began to shift. No one said a word, but the atmosphere was unmistakable. Something had changed. For the first time in a long time, Aaliyah Monroe felt the weight in her chest begin to ease. Not because justice had been fully served, but because, for once, silence hadn't won. She remained seated as the plane taxied to the gate, her posture calm, eyes forward, boots steady on the floor. She didn't need to rush. She had been told not to. "Wait," Marcus had texted. "Let them come to you." She understood that tone. It wasn't just a message, it was strategy. And now, with the door shut and eyes still flicking her way, Aaliyah knew the next steps mattered just as much as the ones that had brought her here. As the rest of the passengers slowly gathered their belongings and moved toward the exit, a uniformed airline agent stepped onto the plane, paused at the front of the first-class cabin, and made direct eye contact with her. "Staff Sergeant Monroe," he said with quiet professionalism, "my name is Kenneth Moore. I'm with the airline's Executive Response Division. May I escort you to the lounge?" She nodded once and stood, lifting her bag without a word. As they walked through the terminal, two security officers flanking them discreetly, Aaliyah didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence had become louder than any speech, and everyone in the terminal seemed to feel it. Some passengers turned to watch her pass. A few whispered. One flight attendant standing near the gate counter dropped her eyes and straightened her blazer. They moved through a set of frosted glass doors, into a quiet corridor, and stopped outside a polished oak double door marked Private Executive Lounge. Kenneth pushed it open and stepped aside. "He's inside," he said. "He's been waiting." Aaliyah walked in. The lounge was dimly lit and quiet, with leather seating and soft music playing faintly from somewhere unseen. In the far corner, her brother Marcus sat, hands folded over a manila folder, his face calm, but alert. He stood the moment he saw her. "You good?" he asked. "I'm good," she answered, and the way she said it told him everything. He nodded once, then gestured to the chair across from him. "Saturday they issued a preliminary statement," he said, tapping the folder. "The usual corporate non-apology. We regret the incident. We're reviewing internal procedures." "They didn't say your name." "Or hers." Aaliyah didn't flinch. "Of course not." Marcus opened the folder and pulled out the printed incident logs, boarding pass data, and a draft proposal. "They're trying to frame it as a training failure," he continued. "Not discrimination. Not misconduct. Just poor judgment." Aaliyah looked at the documents for a moment, then up at him. "And you're not letting that happen?" Not a chance, Marcus said. This isn't about one flight. This is about a system that keeps allowing things like this to happen. We don't fix that with a voucher and a press release. He slid a document across the table. This is the draft proposal we're submitting to the Department of Transportation. Anti-bias training. Passenger identity verification standards. Digital ticket tracking. And an independent review board for discrimination complaints. Aaliyah studied the language. Clear. Firm. Detailed. Who helped write this? She asked. You did, he said. They just haven't heard it yet. She looked up slowly. Then I want to say it myself. Marcus raised an eyebrow. To the press? No, she said. To the people watching. To everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. I want them to hear it from someone who's lived it. Marcus nodded. Then let's make sure they listen. 3 days later, in a sunlit conference room at the National Aviation Policy Forum in D.C., Aaliyah stood behind a podium wearing civilian clothes, no uniform, no ribbons, no decorations. Just a navy blazer, dark jeans, and the quiet poise of someone who had nothing to prove but everything to say. The room was filled with journalists, policy analysts, airline executives, and government officials. Marcus stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. Cameras clicked. Notebooks flipped open. But as soon as Aaliyah opened her mouth, the room fell silent. I didn't come here to get revenge, she began. I didn't come here to demand compensation or to humiliate anyone. I came here because I was told, without words, that I didn't belong. And I knew I wasn't the first. Her voice was steady, each word chosen like a stone laid with purpose. I was asked to leave my seat, not because I broke a rule, not because I raised my voice, but because I didn't look like what someone thought a first-class passenger should be. And that's not a training issue. That's a judgment issue. A bias issue. She paused and looked directly into the cameras. This happens to people every day. People who are quiet. People who don't have titles. People who don't have brothers in high places. They're told to move. To step aside. To lower their heads and just accept it. And most of the time, they do, because fighting it is harder than swallowing it. Her gaze swept the room. But not this time. The applause didn't come immediately. It started slow. Then built. And when it finally echoed through the room, it wasn't just polite, it was genuine. Respectful. Powerful. After the speech, Aaliyah gave a short press interview and then left the room. She didn't linger. She wasn't there for the cameras. Meanwhile, back in her city, Kendall Shaw sat in a quiet community center, surrounded by kids learning about aviation careers. She wore jeans and a plain blouse now, no badge, no wings. And while she never spoke publicly about what happened, her actions began to shift. She showed up on time. She listened more. And when a little black girl told her she wanted to be a pilot someday, Kendall nodded and said, "You already belong in that cockpit." Across the industry, change began to stir. Airlines updated training modules. Cabin crew unions pushed for better reporting mechanisms. The Department of Transportation released a memo endorsing the Monroe Protocols, a new set of federal guidelines modeled after the reforms Marcus and Aaliyah had submitted. And in quiet spaces, airport terminals, waiting areas, boarding lanes, passengers who once looked away now began to speak up. Aaliyah never sought credit. She returned to her quiet life, working as a civilian consultant and occasionally mentoring young veterans. But something had shifted in her world and far beyond it. One morning, she received a letter from a woman named Gloria, a retired schoolteacher. It read, "I once sat in first class with a ticket my son bought me. The flight attendant asked me to prove it. I didn't know how to speak up. But you did. Thank you for sitting where you belonged, so others could, too." Aaliyah folded the letter and placed it inside a journal. Then she packed her duffel, grabbed a boarding pass, and headed to the airport. This time, no one asked her to prove anything. No one questioned her seat. She walked down the jet bridge, calm and ready, and took her place by the window. 2C, the seat she was told she didn't deserve. Now reclaimed. Now hers. And this time, no one would ever dare say otherwise. In telling Aaliyah Monroe's journey, I wanted to shine a light on the kind of injustice that doesn't always come with loud confrontation, but instead arrives quietly, wrapped in assumptions and enforced through silence. What happened to Aaliyah could have happened to anyone, a moment of prejudice masked as procedure, a quiet dismissal that cuts deeper because it's done so calmly, so confidently, that you almost begin to question your own worth. But Aaliyah didn't react with rage. She didn't make a scene. She stood in her truth and allowed her composure to carry more power than a confrontation ever could. And that's the lesson here. Sometimes, the most powerful protest is poise. This story is a reminder that your dignity is not tied to how others see you, it's tied to how you carry yourself when you know you're being underestimated. It's about knowing your worth even when the world tries to reduce you to a stereotype or a misplaced assumption. And it's about the strength of family, the kind of family that shows up, speaks out, and makes sure the world listens when someone tries to erase your seat at the table. To those of you watching or listening who've ever been made to feel invisible, unworthy, or out of place, I hope this story speaks to you. Whether you wear a uniform or simply carry yourself with pride, you belong. And if someone tells you otherwise, remember, it says more about them than it does about you. And to those who have the power to speak up when something feels wrong, please do. The silence of a cabin full of witnesses was louder than any insult that day. But the sound of one voice saying, "That's not right," can change everything. On behalf of U.S. Heartwarming Story, thank you for taking the time to experience this story with us. If it moved you, inspired you, or even made you reflect, I ask that you share it with someone else. Let's keep these conversations going, not just online, but around dinner tables, classrooms, and workplaces. Because real change doesn't start in policy, it starts in people. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for believing that dignity should never be a luxury, it should be a right.